Hello, fellow Star Trek fans. Welcome back to a new episode of the Clonestar Podcast. Now, I am joined by my regular co-host, the lovely Show. But this week, we have got a guest that, well, we kind of had to pinch ourselves a few times when he said yes. He doesn't really need an introduction, but he's a writer, producer, creator who was involved in a whopping 109 Star Trek episodes. And the finales of The Next Generation, Voyager, Enterprise, 2 movies, Generations and First Contact. And a lot of this was in his late 20s and early 30s. What were you doing at that age? A legendary figure in the world of Star Trek and beyond. We are so thrilled to welcome Brannon Braga to the show. Brannon, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Absolutely. And this is going to probably come off the wrong way, but I wrote 109. I produced 300.
Okay, so he's been involved in. He's done 409 episodes.
It was 15 years, so I've done the calculations, and it's yeah.
That's a
just for the record.
Because Brannon, like one of the things we have is we have an Excel file that lists every single Star Trek episode, because we have an on this day post every single day. It took us over a year to create like all these little title cards. So there's 950, I think it is. So you're telling me you've produced nearly half of those episodes?
Well, 300. I was
produced and written.
Yeah.
I think I'm credited with writing 109. That sounds right, but I worked on 300 of the episodes over the course of 3 series, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's only a third, really.
Only.
I know that's like it's only a third. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not good enough. It's not a half. It's not like 2/3. It's only 1/3. Like this is. I think let's rip up the notes, Mike, and start again.
Yeah. Some of them are great episodes, and some are absolutely atrociously horrible episodes. They can't all be winners.
There is no such thing as a terrible episode of Star Trek.
Well, that's a really positive attitude.
I like to keep it on brand. I mean,
So Brannon, with all of that in mind, where does your story start? Like, did you grow up in a creative household, or kind of what was the creative spark that kind of got you interested in kind of, pursuing a life in kind of like movies and TV?
I think my story in that regard is probably fairly common. I was always just a fan of movies, growing up. My favorite TV show was The Twilight Zone, and it ran in syndication every night, and I was pretty obsessed about it. And when a book came out called The Twilight Zone Companion in the 80s, I would sit in front of the TV obsessively, watching and reading about the episode at the same time. And I was also a big James Bond fan. I think my level of interest in James Bond might rival some of Star Trek fans. And I was just a fan of always a fan of science fiction. Always knew I wanted to write and direct movies was my dream. And my career it didn't. I ended up doing some movies, but it started in TV.
I like the fact that you said about the Twilight Zone book. It's kind of the precursor to looking up the trivia on IMDb once you've watched a movie or something like that as well. Brannon, I have to ask you the question, obviously, because you've said it. Who for you is the best James Bond?
Well, it's a tough question. I can rule out some Bonds, and I can winnow it down to Connery, Craig, and Moore. There's always going to be a soft spot for Roger, as far as I'm concerned, for Roger Moore, because he was my Bond. The Spy Who Loved Me was my first Bond movie. And also, from what I've read extensively, that was more the character that Ian Fleming had in mind. And so But having said that, Connery will always be, I think, the first and best.
So I
Craig
noticed.
and the Casino Royale is a magnificent
Mhm.
movie, and Craig's Bond in that movie is great. I had some issues as the Craig movies kept going because they just got a little too much into the Bond's backstory
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
and character, and by No Time to Die, or is it No Time to Die?
yeah. That's the
Yeah.
last one. Yeah,
Uh, it was like I don't Bond doesn't say I love you. Like he's a sociopath. Like, and he's got a kid. And furthermore, you're killing him with nanoprobes. Like what the? I had an interesting experience that relates to Star Trek here because when I walked out of that movie, I was so furious. Not so much that they had killed Bond, but the idiotic way they had done it. It struck me, oh, that's how people felt about Kirk dying in that movie I co-wrote, Generations. I now understand. The shoes on the other foot. I really understand why they were upset.
Brannon, did you go home and cry in the shower and go, "Damn it! All those years ago when they were complaining about it, I understand it a bit more now."
But look, yeah. I mean, when I was growing up, particularly as a teenager in the '80s, there just weren't that many resources for behind the scenes kinds of things. One of the books that I had read early on, just because it was a behind the scenes book, was The Making of Star Trek, which is really a classic behind the scenes book. If people haven't read it, it's just a great behind the scenes, kind of almost definitive in some ways. It's so good. If you love Star Trek, that's great. If you don't, it's still a great book. And even though I didn't watch the original series, I read that because it's just one of those. There's just so little
Yeah.
that you could get your hands on. And then the other thing was I loved horror movies, like most people. And those are really my influences.
This is again, Brandon. We bring you on to ask you the hardest questions you could possibly imagine. To you, what's your favorite horror film?
That one's
See, we have him, Mike. We have him with all the tough questions already. 100%.
it's it's really, there are so many great ones from throughout the decades. And I might say The Exorcist, which still unnerves me. But then, I watched it with my goddaughter when she was 16, and she was just like, "Can we turn the channel?" Like, just bored out of her mind. I'm like, God, I got to update my list here. Some of my favorite horror films would be The Exorcist, Rosemary's Baby, John Carpenter's The Thing.
Hmm.
There's a French film called Martyrs, which I just think is a horror fan's horror film. It's not for everybody. If you've seen it, it's pretty brutal. So I have a list. I don't think I can pick just one.
And Brandon, at this point, then, with your interest in things like the Twilight Zone, in interest in kind of horror films, James Bond, and things like that, was there a kind of a specific genre then that you said, this is what I want to get into in terms of writing? Did you say, I want to get into science fiction, or did you say, I just want to get in and give something a go and be able to kind of just see if I can do it?
I feel like the Twilight Zone was my kind of storytelling, just because it was science fiction, it was horror, it was fantastical, it was a genre piece, but it was a cross genre piece, and you never really knew what kind of story you were going to get. You knew it was going to be really well written, and it was the first time I became aware of a writer, Rod Serling,
Yep.
as a superstar. Like
Yeah.
I want to write like this guy. He could write. I mean, the episodes sometimes they were a wartime genre. Sometimes it was time travel. Sometimes it was the devil. I mean, this guy could do anything, and the show could do anything, and that was. I knew that's what I wanted to do ultimately in some shape or form. I didn't ever really want to do TV necessarily because movies were cool, TV was not. When I was growing up, TV was Charlie's Angels. That's obviously changed. But when I got hired on Next Generation, though I found the show to be extremely intimidating because there was already quite a bit of history behind the show, and and I was intimidated by the technology, and can I write this? I said I'm just going to treat this like the Twilight Zone because really it's an anthology show, and you can do any kind of story on this show.
Yeah.
It has recurring characters and a recurring setting, but I really can do anything, and that to me was my chance to do Twilight Zone like stories.
Now, how did Next Generation come about then for you, Brannon?
Well, I was going to college at UC Santa Cruz, which had a small film school, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I just saw a poster for an internship program with the sponsored by the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. That's an American institution that puts on the Emmy Awards every year, and they have an internship program with 26 different categories, from costuming to hair to acting to script writing. And I applied 2 years in a row. First year didn't get it. Second year got it, and they placed me on Next Generation. And so I was an intern for 8 weeks. My first day on the job, Best of Both Worlds Part 1 had just aired. So, and I walked into Michael Pillar's office to meet him, and he was at his keyboard working on the script for Part 2. And as just a joke, he said, any ideas on how to beat the Borg? Because he hadn't figured it out yet. And that's kind of, and it was, the writing staff was cleared out for various reasons, and the only people left were Michael and Ron Moore. And he kept Ron. Ron was a staff writer at that time. And so I came at a fortuitous time, and because they needed writers.
Because I know that William Shatner's documentary Chaos on the Bridge kind of details like the complete chaos behind the scenes, especially in seasons 1 and 2, kind of continuing to season 3. Did you kind of feel, Brandon, when you came on board, as you said, like you'd Michael Pillar, you just had Ron, and now you had yourself. Did you say to yourself, Christ, this place is a mess. Like this mightn't even last, the 4th season. This is all over the place. Or did you say, no, this guy, Michael Pillar, I might trust in him. He seems like a good guy.
I didn't know enough about how television was written or made to make any kind of assessment. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what a writing staff was. I didn't know any of this. So I really didn't have any way to make judgments of any kind. Now, as an outsider, I do remember watching the pilot for Next Generation and the first couple episodes and thinking that this isn't for me. And eventually when season 3 was airing, when I was in college, I remember overhearing conversations, people saying, oh, Next Generation's good now. It got good. And that's just, pre-internet word of mouth.
Yeah.
And so when I actually watched, my first episode since the first season, Best of Both Worlds Part 1, I was like, okay, this show has completely transformed into something amazing. I'm coming in at a good time,
Yeah.
But in terms of writers coming and going. I didn't know what I was doing. So I didn't really.
Do you think that worked in your favor, Brennan? Because, like, I suppose not having, say, as you said, because you didn't know what you were doing, it's almost like you had nothing to fear in that situation because you were there going, I'm only here for 8 weeks. I've nothing really to fear about this. So it's going to be a good experience for me.
Yeah, I mean, I was there to absorb.
Yeah.
And I watched as Pillar hired Joe Menosky, Jerry Taylor, and really the core writers that would remain through the run of the series. And I became friends with Ron. I became friends with really everybody that came aboard. And so, and I was lucky enough that Michael was my mentor, and really Jerry Taylor took a real interest in me, and so did Joe. And I wouldn't have been hired on staff without them. They kind of had to convince Pillar, because I was 25 years old, with no experience, So, so Michael listened to them and threw me a rewrite, but with Ron Moore writing with Ron, and the script turned out pretty good. That was a script called Reunion,
Yeah.
where Worf's girlfriend is murdered, and his son is introduced, and it turned out really well. And then, as another test, he gave me my own script to write, which was a script called Identity Crisis.
That seems right up your street, Brennan, to be honest. It has everything that you would like in a script in one go. Like that scene on the holodeck is just ridiculously unsettling when Geordi is there trying to see the ghostly shape and all that.
Yeah, that's a great example of like that was me basically doing an homage to one of my favorite thrillers, Brian De Palma's Blowout, which was really an homage to Blow Up. Antonioni's Blow Up, with the holodeck, instead of photography, and that turned out pretty good. And they ended up hiring me, and
Brandon, what kind of like one of the things is as well, I've always heard that Jerry Taylor and Michael Piller, they've always been spoken about in such well regard in terms of who they were, how they went about their business. What was it like to work and know them as well?
I mean, I have such great love. They're both dead now. Pillar, I had, I was in awe of what I couldn't figure out how they were doing what they were doing. How could this, even though I was there, this small staff of writers could sit and break out a episode scene by scene so quickly. I can't think that fast. Like what I just was like, I can't, there's no way in hell that I could ever do this, much less sit down and write a script as quickly as scripts had to be written. It just seemed like magic to me. But the more time I spent there, the more I started to kind of learn and get the hang of it. Pillar was a kind of slightly more an inscrutable person than Jerry. He was kind of the tough love dad, and Jerry was more the nurturer. Like Pillar, who was a brilliant writer, who in my opinion turned Next Generation around. I mean, if you could really, I mean, Rick Berman hired Michael, and Rick Berman deserves a tremendous amount of credit for all the things he did to keep that franchise, the integrity of that franchise. But you can just point to the second Pillar came on that staff and took over the staff. This show changes completely. And he found a way to get moral dilemmas and conflicts with the characters, and the show took off. But I always sensed that Pillar was always in searching for more experienced writers, because the staff, except for Jerry Taylor, we were all pretty young. Whereas Jerry nurtured us, and really, I think, had a little more faith in us as writers. And I'm not sure I would have, without Jerry's guidance, I might not have lasted. I mean, most of the scripts I wrote turned out good, but I remember one time I had a rewrite handed to me, and I whiffed it, man. It sucked, and I thought for sure I was going to be fired. And I don't know, maybe Michael was thinking of firing me, but Jerry told me, "You're in no peril, don't worry." It meant a lot to hear that.
Yeah.
So they were really crucial figures. I don't think I met Rick Berman for the first couple of years I was there. He was in the building across the street from the writers' building, and was kind of this mythic figure, Rick. Any notes I got through Michael or Jerry. And I don't really, I have to think it wasn't until the episode Schisms and with the poem Ode to Spot.
Yep.
That I think Rick kind of took notice, maybe,
Yeah.
And I was finally called over, and Rick and I ended up becoming good friends.
I have to ask it just in terms of, say, like there's a brilliant picture of you, Brannon, on your Memory Alpha page. It's a picture of you sitting at the helm on the bridge of the Enterprise. I'm just wondering, like, as you said, you joined in season 4, and like I was watching a bit of season 4 and season 5 in the last few weeks. I was just remembering, like, every episode is an absolute bloody classic. And as you were saying, the writing staff was kind of so young as well at the time, and like all these incredible episodes were coming out week after week. Were you aware at the time, was there any sense that we're actually creating something amazing every single week here? Because, like, obviously when the Next Generation started, it had a bumpy start. Obviously there was going to be massive comparisons to the original series because the movies were still ongoing as well at the same time. Found its footing in the 3rd season, completely took off like a goddamn rocket in the 4th season. But were you aware of it, or was it just kind of noise? We're just here doing a job, writing the episodes. That's absolutely fine. Or was there a sense of we're really doing bloody good work here?
Best of Both Worlds 1 and 2 had created such a cultural impact in the day. And it's funny, people didn't do 2-part episodes, daytime soap operas, sure, but it was such a foreign concept that they literally had to put "to be continued" at the end. Like, they had to instruct the audience. This doesn't have an ending, and we're going to continue with the story in another episode. Like, it's actually kind of comical.
Yes, your television has not broken. It hasn't just stopped.
Right. And then the poor audience had to wait a whole 2 months or whatever it was. We did 26 episodes a year, so there wasn't a very big break even between seasons. But we knew from Best of Both Worlds that there was a sea change, and that Next Generation was now on the cover of TV Guide, and articles were being written about it. But in making the show, it was there's a lot of episodes, and to my recollection, we weren't thinking, oh, we're making classic televisions, but there were times when a script would come in like Darmok by Joe Menosky, where you read it and you went, oh, this is amazing. Joe's a genius. Metaphorical language. How did he come up with this? This is going to be a fucking classic. Yeah. And it was. But most of the episodes weren't that way. And then there are episodes that became classics, like Cause and Effect, which I wrote, that I just assumed would get me fired because it was so kind of, not by today's standards, but back then it was so radical that people were calling into the TV station, the various TV stations that aired the show, saying there's something wrong with, you're showing the same scenes over and over again. There's something wrong with the broadcast. And I just assumed, well, this is going to go down in history as the stupidest episode of TV ever. You know?
Brannon, can I just check with you here? For the first few episodes that you wrote, did you hand it in going, that's the one that's getting me fired? I'm 100% gone after writing this one anyway.
Oh, I was a staff writer. You know, I wasn't even I only had credits on the episode I wrote. I was at the low end of the totem pole. I was on, I think, a week-to-week contract. And when you're on a week-to-week contract, you know, you live in fear a little bit. You know?
I can imagine.
I felt a lot better when they gave me an actual like a year-long contract. But you definitely, and then when we saw, in fact, the reaction to Say Cause and Effect actually was a phenomenal reaction. It informs how you move forward. I'm like, okay, well, that means I can do other structurally experimental things. You know, there's an appetite for it.
Yeah.
And so we were all just kind of figuring it out. But I don't ever feel like I never would have imagined that I would still be talking about the work that we did on that show 30 plus years later. That I'm sure it didn't occur to any of us.
Well, Brannon, if it's in any way to reassure you, when we started doing interviews for this podcast, if I had a list of my top 5 people that I wanted on it, you were always on that list. So that is the impact you've had all these years later in terms of how much your work means to someone like myself as well. So, Brannon,
well, that means a lot, but you're going to be disappointed if you aren't already.
Is that what you used to say when you handed in your script to Michael Piller?
Yeah.
Whatever you think, buddy, you're going to be disappointed.
This sucks.
Yeah.
Just fire me now. I have the resignation letter here in my pocket as well, just in case you need it in that situation.
I need to work on my self-esteem, maybe.
Like, I find it funny, Brendan, you were saying we were just figuring it out, and like, as I said, season 4, 5, 6, 7, like just ludicrous in terms of its quality. How well and how quickly did you hit it off with Ron D. Moore?
Well, Ron and I wrote that script together, and there was good chemistry. And there came a point where Michael created Deep Space Nine, and he left Next Generation, and Jerry Taylor took over the reins, and she started to rely more heavily on me and Ron to write more and actually start structuring episodes ourselves. And that's where things really started clicking. And we just, we didn't write all our episodes together, but we wrote a lot of stuff together. And then when we were asked to write the finale of Next Gen, we were asked to write the first Next Generation movie. And because we made a good team, and we continued writing stuff together through the run of the show.
So how did you approach writing All Good Things? Because again, by this point, the Next Generation had been an absolute, like, a complete juggernaut. It had been fantastic. It was about to go to the big screen. You have to somehow wrap up 7 years worth of storylines in a really kind of positive way and create an absolute classic of a finale. How did you approach it? Like, what was the kind of idea in your head saying, okay, what kind of story are we going to tell here?
Well, I had this kind of Slaughterhouse 5, Vonnegut idea where Captain Picard would get unstuck in time. And it seemed to me like a great way to pay homage to the send a Valentine to the series, because you could go back to the pilot, you could be in present day and the future, and intercut those things. Seemed like a good high concept for the episode. And at that point we knew that fans really liked that kind of thing. They liked that kind of radical kind of experimental storytelling. And I think it was Ron that wanted to bring Q back, which was a no-brainer. Because he was in very first episode, and it just seemed like, okay, he's back for the final judgment of humanity, and it's a bit of a sci-fi mystery, and it just kind of it came together really effortlessly. There was we didn't get to do everything we wanted to do. The the storyline in the future, which ultimately takes place on a medical ship helmed by Crusher, was supposed to be the Enterprise D getting stolen out of a museum, which I think Terry Matalas ripped off from Picard.
I was going to say, I've heard that storyline before.
And that's what we originally wrote. And it was for budgetary reasons and for running time reasons. It was just too elaborate. And I wish we fought harder to keep it, because if you really think about it, it's like, okay, we're undercutting between the Enterprises, but not the future.
Yeah.
We needed to have all three time periods. Should have had an Enterprise. At one point, we even had the Borg in there. I don't remember what they were doing in the future. They were attacking Earth or something. And
had they won at Wolf Chief? Sorry, they won at Wolf Chief Rebellion, but had they taken over the universe at this point? I think that's what I read somewhere before.
Yeah, it was going to be
timeline.
It was going to be something like that, and everyone decided, no, let's not do the Borg. It's going to just kind of take over the story.
We'll save that for a movie.
Kind of. I think maybe even in the back of our minds we were thinking that. And then, of course, Ron and I were writing Generations along the way. Generations was like a year and a half of writing. We had to write the finale in like 3 weeks. But there was a lot of there was overlap. And, as I've said many times, the All Good Things would have made a better movie than Generations.
So when you turned in All Good Things, then Brannon, was this the first time you actually said, "Hey lads, this is a fucking great episode," or did you yet again say, "Lads, this is absolute shite. Look, just take it, fire me, it's grand, no worries"?
There was truly. We knew it was a good story. We didn't have a lot of time to scrutinize. I mean, it's like literally. I don't know why I remember this detail. It's like I remember walking in one morning, and I'm walking into Ron's office and saying, "Let's call it All Good Things." All Good Things was come to an end.
Yep.
Okay. I mean, just we were so busy. We were operating on like a raw instinct, and I think our instincts were pretty finely honed at that point, and we knew what to do with that finale. We just knew what to do. There was only one false note in it, and Michael wanted to add a storyline. There was a storyline that a subplot he wanted to add, where the anomaly, which was really just meant to be a MacGuffin, was they're making people younger, and there were ships gathering because whatever was radiating was de-aging them. And Ron and I just absolutely were like, you mean to tell me we're stealing the Enterprise out of a museum and putting this completely irrelevant subplot in? We ended up cutting it. But if you watch the episode, there's a couple of little remnants, like Geordi's eyes getting younger.
Yep.
Yeah.
It goes nowhere.
Yeah.
Why is that in there? That was a remnant from that storyline that we cut out of the episode. And he ended up using an insurrection.
Yeah.
By the way.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. When that aired on Irish TV back in '94, whatever it was, when the episode ended, there was the continuity broadcaster just said, "That is the last episode of The Next Generation." But coming up next is a problem even Data couldn't solve. I was like, oh my God, what is this? Is this a new Star Trek thing or something like that? And I'll always remember it was a 5-minute cartoon about what does it mean to be. I remember thinking, that is so fucking weird. But why I bring that up is I always, every time I used to rewatch All Good Things, it was the broadcast from Irish State TV that I watched. And then one day, BBC Two over in the UK were showing it like as a complete movie. So I recorded it. And there was a scene when old Picard is on the Pasteur and he's about to walk out onto the bridge and he suddenly stops because older Q is there. And I was like, what the hell is this? I said, is this a deleted scene or something? And then I realized RTE had cut one of the most important scenes in the frickin' episode when older Q tells Picard, what you were and what you will become will always be with you. And then Picard's there, the answer isn't the time skipping. And I was there, you've got to be kidding me. I said, of all the scenes for RTE to cut in this situation, it's that. And that took me like 5 years to actually realize that was an entire scene cut out.
Didn't we come across something else recently that was cut on Paramount Plus compared to, what was it?
Oh, Emissary. DS9's pilot. Yeah.
There's a whole scene missing.
We noticed that the entire scene of Chief O'Brien leaving the Enterprise was cut out of Paramount Plus's because they have it broken into 2 individual episodes, whereas if you watch Netflix, it's a full movie and the entire scene is still in there. And I was like, what's going on here? Why would you do this?
Poor Miles.
Over the years, tuning in wherever Next Gen or any of the others happen to be airing, and seeing the scenes that they're cutting out for time, you just can't do that on a Star Trek episode, particularly in ones that are like mysteries, like you could unravel the whole thing. It's terrible. It's terrible.
And say at this point then, Brannon, like you said, you had 3 weeks to write All Good Things. When did you start writing Generations, and when did you finish? So were you kind of like taking like, say, okay, today we're going to focus on All Good Things, tomorrow we'll do Generations, or were we just kind of saying we can park Generations for 3 weeks and just get all good things done?
I think we were asked to write the movie before the finale because writing a movie just is a longer process, and there were some overlaps where we had to pull double duty on certain days. We'd write the movie in the morning and the TV show in the afternoon. But primarily, I think we kind of set the movie aside to write the finale. And it was a strange experience because you're writing the end of one thing and the beginning of another. I mean, even being on the set for the final scene. The last scene they shot, I think, or one of the last scenes, was the poker scene.
Yeah,
and people were crying on the set. It was really emotional. But the next day they were revamping the sets for the movie, and I'm like, why the tears? Like, well, because the TV show will always be the special thing.
Yeah,
it's a TV show first. And it's like you're not going to have those characters in your living room every week anymore. And it was, that was the loss.
Yeah.
And
because I think that show could have run 10 years. I mean, they pulled the plug at the height of its popularity, by the way. The ratings were as great as they'd ever been. And it was kind of a smart thing to do, but very unprecedented. You don't take a show off the air when it's getting huge ratings.
When we spoke to Dennis McCarthy on the podcast, I was talking to him about the end of The Next Generation, and I said, did you ever try and do the ending music of After All Good Things in the way that, say, when Cheers finished, that the music was different instead of just being the normal music, instead of just, it was kind of a bit more kind of quieter and a bit more solemn. And he said he thought about it, but he knew he wouldn't get anywhere with it, because when All Good Things ends, the normal exit music plays, and it's just like, it feels like we'll be seeing another adventure next week, but the show is actually fully over and things like that. I wanted to ask you something about Generations, actually, Brandon. I can't remember, was it on the director's comment or the commentary on the movie that you and Ron recorded, or was it an interview I read somewhere? But correct me if I'm wrong on this. Was it a case that you were trying to write a movie about kind of experience, about loss, about life and things like that. But looking back, you felt maybe you were too young to write about those kind of heady topics. Again, maybe I'm misremembering it, but I think that's what I remember from something about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, but I guess between the two of us, we were 60, Ron and I. So maybe, but I mean, I think part of me thinks, yeah, we were not, I'll speak for myself only. Did I have any level of maturity even close enough to be able to write about mortality? But on the other hand, I think, well, that's what writing is, I mean, there's some good dialogue at the end of that movie talking about, those themes. And I think the real problem with that movie is just we had too many masters to serve. We had the Star Trek in general. We had the original series. We had Next Gen. We had two different captains, and they both were very vocal.
And a missing comm badge.
A missing comm badge?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Jean-Luc Picard's comm badge disappears.
Oh, I didn't know that.
After he beams onto Viridian 3
when he
from the
beams
Klingon
onto
ship,
Viridian 3, so if I remember correctly, the prop guy left it somewhere in the studio somewhere. They forgot to bring it. So if you watch it, near enough every scene on Viridian 3, Jean-Luc doesn't have a comm badge.
Wow, never noticed that. Of course, today they would just put it on with
digitally.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. And what's really interesting is part of that sequence was reshot.
Yeah. And
So
you can tell because he's got a comm badge on.
Oh, he does. Okay.
In the reshoots, he has it, but for about 80%, it's not there. Yeah, because there's a scene. He's crawling through the hole in the force field with the rocks.
Yeah,
he has it on there, and then it disappears again. Yeah.
Oh my god! I did not know
noticed.
that.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody noticed on our.
Brannon, you are talking to Star Trek fans here. Star Trek fans will notice, if somebody's hair is out of place in some way, they're going to go, wait a second, why is Jonathan Frakes' hair different? I was watching Conundrum earlier on today, and I was there going, wow, his hair is so different in this episode compared to what it normally is like in an episode.
Well, I mean, talking about hair, I mean, how many hairstyles did Kate have in the first 3 seasons of Voyager?
Yeah.
And Brannon, as you said, you had so many masters to serve. So, in writing Generations, did that weight of expectation play on you and Ron's mind writing it?
Yeah, I mean, Ron and I were just grateful to be involved. We had to learn how to write a movie. What makes a movie different than a TV show from just a writing perspective? And it was, it was a learning process. And I wish the movie didn't have to accomplish so much. And I certainly wish that, I've said in interviews before that I thought I came into Rick's office with Ron with an image of the two Enterprises locked in battle, because there was a lot of talk at that time about, well, who's the better captain? And if they got in a fight or a dog fight, who would win? And I'm like, well, we got to put these guys in a space battle, and Kirk's got to die in the bridge of the Enterprise instead of on a bridge. And for whatever reason, that's just not the way it ended up going. And they ended up cooking eggs together.
Yeah.
And so there was just, even at that time, I loved my time travel stories, but the Nexus was just not, it was, in my opinion, just a lazy time travel device. Oh, when you're in there, there's no time.
Mm-hmm.
it just wasn't rigorous enough from a storytelling perspective. And it got the captains together, but there's just a lot of, we just had less control of the situation. Having said that, I think we made some good, I think giving Data an emotion chip, though it was controversial at the time, that's just not something you would do on the TV show. But for a movie, you need to take bigger swings.
Yeah.
And crashing the ship, though it had been done before in Star Trek 3, we realized you had to have more scope. And
Yep.
but then there were some missteps. I don't think anyone gave a shit about Captain Picard's nephew. We never met the person, and that the movie's his storyline starts with that.
Yeah.
And I don't think it just there were a lot of things that just didn't work.
But Brandon, if it's of any consolation to you, Generations will always be my next generation film. It is 30 years old, and I still adore it to this day. I put up a photo of like every single bit of Generations. I have the book, the audio book, the DVD, the special edition DVD, the Blu-ray. I've got the computer game or the Game Boy game about it and things like that. So I absolutely adore it to death.
But it wasn't the first Star Trek movie you saw.
I saw Star Trek 6 in the cinema, but I didn't really appreciate Star Trek at that point, and I don't really have much of a recollection of it. But I was there for Generations on opening day. So back in Ireland, Saturday at 2:00 was your opening day. There was none of this Friday night stuff or midnight screenings. Saturday at 2:00, and the movie, the projector cut out just as Picard was about to bury Kirk for 30 minutes. And we did not know if it was going to come back or not. So loads of people started leaving. Two of my friends left, and me and one of the other lads said, "No, we're sticking. We have to see if this thing actually ends or not." And I'll tell you a very funny story. So my father, hated Star Trek with a passion, but apparently he did watch it in the 1970s. And I dragged him to that. I also dragged the First Contact into Insurrection. About halfway during the movie, anyway, I turned and I said, "Wonder is he paying attention to the movie or not?" I looked over at him and I said, "Dad," I said, "what's going on in the movie right now?" And he just kind of looked at me impatiently, and he kind of started dismissively putting his hand towards the screen, and he said, "I remember the Klingons. They're looking through Geordie's visor." And I said, "How the fuck did you know that?" And he said, "Because I'm watching the movie. Would you stop talking to me?"
Now that's that's great. Good for him. Generations. You part of the reason you love it is you saw it at the right age, and it was sounds like really your first Star Trek movie. And for me, with the Bond picture, The Spy Who Loved Me, which I absolutely adore. But man, I've gotten into some arguments with one of the fellow writers on the Orville, David Goodman, who just thinks it's a piece of crap. And
how dare he? The Spy Who Loved Me is fantastic.
He might be. I mean, look, he might be right, but that was my first one. I'm never gonna. There's just something about that first thing.
There's two opinions. You either love Star Trek or you're wrong. That's it.
But The Spy Who Loved Me, come on, it's so fucking good.
Oh yeah, it's just filled with one great set piece after another.
Oh yeah, totally, absolutely. It's absolutely fantastic. What a team tune as well.
So,
I thought I paused for a second there.
okay. I'll tell you what. While you're thinking for a second, whose idea was it to crash the Enterprise D?
Well, we had,
because she is a well-loved ship.
Yeah, I know it. We talked a lot about. There was always talk about separating the saucer, and throughout the seasons it was like, should we separate the saucer in this episode? Should we finally do this? What does it mean?
Shaq, someone let me eject the warp core.
And it's like, well, it's going to be really expensive, and we just never really got around to it. And I think I don't remember whose idea it was. It seemed like it would be a fun sequence. I think it probably didn't have the impact. It would have had more impact if Star Trek 3 hadn't done it.
Yeah.
Already, but it is what it is. I was just talking to John Knowles the other day, who was still the main visual effects supervisor at ILM and was on both Generations and First Contact, and I was asking him, the crash sequence looks great when it's in space, but on the planet, they had a huge model and all this stuff. But I said, wouldn't it have been better at night? I feel like it didn't look all that good, We should have set that crash in.
And that was your big takeaway looking back on 30 years of the Generations. Fuck it, lads. We should have done it at night. The movie's ruined. What have we done?
Anyway.
Actually, there's a good make you a featurette on the DVD of the crash sequence, and John Knoll is very prominent in that as well, showing how they did it. And it's fantastic how they did it with the miniature and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I look at First Contact, and those visual effects hold up 100%.
Oh yeah,
I mean, that's how good ILM was and is. I mean, and all models. It just looks fabulous.
And Brannon, I suppose at this point, like you've been working Next Generation for a good few years. You've written Generations and all that. If you were to pick one of the characters that you enjoyed writing for most, who would it be?
I mean, the obvious answer is Data, because he's one of those sci-fi characters. But I liked taking the characters like Riker and Geordi and giving them storylines, because they were underserviced, I thought.
Yeah.
I took a stab at Beverly.
With Sub Rosa, is this?
Yeah. So I challenge your hypothesis that all Star Trek episodes are good episodes. That is not a good episode.
I think that's probably one of the only episodes I can agree on that's less than ideal.
Mike, I think this is Brannon's self-conscience getting to him yet again, where he's there going, all of my work is shite. If you actually look at everything I've written, all of it's garbage. It's all lies, every single part of it, and all that kind of thing.
Now, but so let me get this straight. The premise is there's a colony on another planet that they decided to recreate Ireland.
No, Scotland.
Or Scotland, sorry. Sorry about that. I just not remember.
That happens in Voyager.
That happens in Voyager, Brannon. We'll talk about that. Don't you worry about that.
It's just it's just harebrained from beginning to end.
So Generations is out and things like that. How fast is the turnaround to starting to work on Voyager then? Actually, wait a second, just one thing as well. In the midst of all this, did you ever say to yourself, I wouldn't mind giving DS9 a crack because Ron is over there? Or did you say, no, I want to go over to Voyager? Or was there ever a possibility you could have gone to DS9?
Yes. Mike, at the end of season 6 of Next Generation, Michael Piller invited me to join the writing staff of Deep Space Nine. He didn't tell me I had to, but he said you'd be very welcome over here. We think your science fictional kind of storytelling would be a welcome addition. We need high concept stories. And it was still a relatively new show. And it was tempting. But I said no. And the reason I said no was I wanted to see Next Gen through to the end.
Yeah.
I just really did. And I just didn't feel like Deep Space Nine was my thing. And I'm glad I did. I didn't know I was going to write the finale for Next Gen, but I'm really glad I stayed, But there was a moment in time when I almost did go over.
And how soon did Voyager come up then for you?
Voyager, I was writing Voyager before it even was cast. Around the time First Contact was released, pretty sure. I remember being in England for the premiere and being worried about how Voyager was going to go. Maybe I hadn't started yet. I don't know.
So Voyager premiered in 95 in January, and then First Contact was Christmas 96.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yep.
So I'm having a little memory. So it was just early on. So Voyager, I don't remember exactly when Voyager came about. I do remember sneaking into Jerry Taylor's office and getting a copy of the pilot because wouldn't let us read it, and I was dying to read it.
Because I was going to say the pilot is one of the few episodes in season 1 that you didn't really do much on, did you? If I remember correctly.
No, I didn't. I had nothing to do with the creation of Voyager. I was all. I mean, I did give a note that I felt that the script was missing some science fictional element. It was all politics, and and what Pillar added was the Banjo Man thing. He gave to give it a little Twilight Zone. You know, whether it was successful or not, I don't know. But the whole caretaker thing, I think was added later. But no, I didn't have. The only thing I created on Voyager was 7 of 9. I didn't have anything to do with the initial.
And what was the appeal?
I was involved in casting to some degree, you know, and I was certainly one of the people who was gung ho about Geneviève Bujold.
And what happened there in the end, Brannon? Why didn't it work out for her? Because we've all seen the kind of the footage of her on the bridge and things like that. But
well, what happened was her name came up, and I went crazy because I was a fan of her movies. You know, Coma. I really liked. What was that one movie, little art film that she did? Choose Me, it was called. I just was in love with her, and I thought she would to get a movie star in the role. And I remember Rick saying, Rick was the voice of reason. He was like, you know, this is a movie actor. You know, this is not going to end well. He ended up being right. And what happened was simple. She was not used to working in television, and she was not connecting to what the hell was going on in this strange universe, and she wasn't getting the kind of direction and the kind of intimate relationship with her director that movie actors are used to. And I think Geneviève was, you know, probably overwhelmed by the work schedule, and her choice for the character was just too soft spoken. It was, I mean, like, I remember being the first day of shooting, Rick Colby, the director, just asking her to talk more loudly, which is like, for a movie actor of her caliber, just getting the note to talk louder.
Oh God.
Is very, I can see why that would be highly offensive, you know? And so it didn't last very long, and she wanted out and realized she'd made a mistake.
Luckily enough, it was early on, and that the change we made kind of, you know, seamlessly, not as, like, you know, not have to do too many reshoots and things like that. Brannon, what was it about Voyager that appealed to you? Because obviously you'd finished Next Gen, you'd written the movie, you could have done anything else you wanted. Like, was it your desire to stay within the Star Trek universe just in general, or was it because something specifically about Voyager appealed to you?
I just don't. I think it was momentum. I mean, I wasn't done with Star Trek yet. Like, if the way the kinds of stories I was telling on Voyager could have been Next Gen episodes. I was just still had stories to tell. And some of those episodes, if they had been next gen episodes, I think would have worked in some cases even better.
Yeah.
So I was just into it. And when Voyager was coming, Star Trek was at this apex. We were on the cover of Time magazine. First Contact was a smash hit. Voyager was about to come out. It was or had just come out, and to 20 million people watching the pilot. I was in no rush to leave.
Yeah. And like when you look at it as well, like between the Next Gen, DS9, Voyager, there's such a continuity behind the scenes in terms of like directors, composers, design artists, writers, and all that. Like, yeah, it just seemed like this massive family just kind of doing different things at all kind of time, which kind of was almost unheard of, I suppose, in television at that kind of time, to everyone just keep on kind of stick into it and things like that. In terms of then, say, with Voyager, what did you want to do to try and differentiate it from, say, The Next Generation? Because again, it is a ship-based show, and it's going to be, as you said, like an anthology show. So every week it's going to be something different. But did you try and differentiate it in some specific way to what you would have done on TNG?
Initially, no. I mean, the paradox of Voyager was that it has a very good premise. The ship being catapulted to an unfamiliar part of the galaxy where you couldn't rely on any of the usual Star Trek elements. We get to create a all new races, all new situations. And of course, the paradox is, oh my God, we have to create all new
everything, ships, species,
everything.
planets, everything.
And you can't really like say, oh, okay, well, this species is working really well because we're leaving.
Yeah.
We're always on the move.
Yeah.
And so, if we invented, say, the Vidians, those creatures that were stealing
organs.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, well, those are good aliens. We got to bring them back somehow. But it was always a bit of a strain. Like, why are they back in the picture? We haven't seen them in an entire year. But I struggled with the Maquis thing, and I'm only speaking for myself here, nobody else. But I just felt like, okay, so let's say you get, instead of being thrown into the Delta Quadrant of the galaxy, you're stranded on an island, and you have radically different ideologies than the other people there. How long before you just need to eat? How long are you going to bicker about things that have no context or relevance anymore? Before, and I always thought this Maquis thing's just going to evaporate super fast.
Yeah.
None of it matters.
Because I think was it learning curve in season 1? I think kind of brought it up when Tuvok was trying to teach some of the Maquis officers how to be Starfleet officers. There wasn't a whole lot beyond that, really. I think in it, because at the end of the pilot, all the Maquis crew were wearing Starfleet uniforms.
Well, there was the whole Seska thing as well.
And by the way, Captain Janeway's not going to put up with that shit. Not in this situation. And the Maquis crew members they know that. They want to live. They want to survive. I mean, now you have a common goal of getting back home against impossible odds.
Yeah.
To bicker about politics and geopolitics is just empty. And so what I ended up gravitating toward was ultimately, I think, the introduction of Seven of Nine, and deciding, let's make the Borg the Klingons of the Delta Quadrant. Like, this is going to be Voyager's arch nemesis. People love the Borg. We haven't seen them in a while, since First Contact. And Seven of Nine will, I think, reinvigorate all the characters in some individual way. And then as I was taking over the show, or even before, I was just like, we need to tell more cinematic stories. And for instance, I wanted my initial concept for Year of Hell was to do it over the course of an entire season. I knew that would be shot down because they were still putting to be continueds on two-parters. There was no way in hell they were going to do a 26-hour storyline.
I suppose as well that kind of type of show wasn't really seen of back then, wasn't it? That's what
No.
that is where
Not in prime. Not on a.
DS9 had these
DS9
massive
dabbled.
stories.
It really, I'll tell you, the breakthrough show that I ended up working on eventually that did that was 24.
24. I'm just thinking, sorry, of Brannon for once, absolutely certainly going into the big office, kicking down the door, and saying, "Lads, full season. This is what it's going to be. Just shout it down, tell me it's shit, and I know it's not going to happen anyway. Just tell me now and get it out of the way."
No, I remember discussing it with Jerry Taylor, and she, she was willing to support the idea, but we all knew that the answer would be no. But the idea of doing mini movies, that these aren't two-parters. These are like Voyager movies.
Because I remember, I remember reading
Joe Manosky, by the way.
I remember reading somewhere before, and it was saying that when you watch two-parters in, say, DS9 and The Next Generation, the first part is fantastic. Second part, maybe not as good. But saying about with Voyager, it's the complete opposite. The first part is good. The second part is better. And I always thought that was true, because I always thought that the Voyager two-parters, like Year of Hell, say The Killing Game, say Equinox, Unimate Zero, I thought the second parts were even better. I thought Voyager did that better than any of the other series. Did you think that as well, Brandon, when you did them?
Yes, because because I wasn't thinking of them as two-parters, but rather as one movie. And it may seem a subtle distinction, but when you're structuring it that way, and you don't see, by the way, you're not between seasons. Like, okay, we did part one, let's take vacation, come back, and now what's going to happen? How are we going to defeat the Borg? We're going to put them to sleep. You're structuring it more like a movie, and at that point, I had some movie experience,
mm-hmm.
And so I just think even subliminally, I knew that the story had to escalate into had to have amazing climax and just feel more like a piece rather than two pieces.
I mean, for me, Voyager was the one that I watched religiously every week. I mean, by this time I was 6-7 years old. Obviously, I got a peak of TNG, but it wasn't really there. So Voyager was the one that I watched every week with Dad. And season 4, for me, is the best season. Because you have the Year of Hell, which both are incredible episodes. You have the Killing Game, which are some of my favorites. And it has my favorite episode, which is Message in a Bottle.
Oh, I don't know, Mike. I think season 5 is better. I think season 5
really?
is yeah, like it starts off at night and drone, and they're fucking class episodes.
They are. And okay, other than Equinox, because Equinox is another fantastic two-parter.
By the way, didn't season 4 have Scorpion as well?
Yeah, Scorpion Part 2. Yeah.
But for me, season 4 was that one season where for me, 2/3 of it knocked the ball out the park.
Forget it. Season 5, Mike, timeless as well. I have timeless, raised timeless above. Like, would you get out of that? I've won your season 5.
Season 5 had Dark Frontier, that great two-parter.
Yeah.
I think you're both right. I mean, my instinct would go to season 5. But
yes. Woo! Listen to that, Mike. In your face, Mike. That's what it is.
Well, I'll tell you what, then, on that note, then, of season 4, season 5, which alien race did you prefer writing for, or did you enjoy writing for the most? Because there's some really great ones. You've got the Vidians, you've got, obviously, the Borg, Yeah, the Kazon,
the Hirogen as
the
well.
Hirogen.
Well, there's no question the Borg, only because it was really starting with the movie First Contact, and the invention of the Borg Queen was the first time we started to develop a philosophy of the Borg that goes beyond just mindless assimilation, that
Yeah.
they have some vision of perfection, and the more that it's a great, it should be considered an honor to be assimilated, almost, you know. And that the hive mind is the greatest biological aspiration you could ever dream of.
Yeah.
And you really just have to kind of think, oh yeah, I could see how that might make sense. And even Seven of Nine, I think some of her perceived imperiousness is really coming from a place where there's some part of her that thinks the Borg way of life was better than the human way of life. And so expanding on Borg culture, so to speak, was a lot of fun. The Vidians weren't in the show enough to really make a difference.
There's only 3 episodes, was it? I think it was the
Yeah.
Phage, Life Signs, and Deadlock, I think.
Deadlock, yeah. They were interesting initially. The Kazon I never really wrote for, because they just didn't, with all due respect, didn't really interest me. The Hirogen,
They were only there for like a very kind of, I think it was like 5 in 6 episodes, where I think was it Hunter's Prey and the Killing Game, I think, was that the 4, and then obviously Flesh and Blood much later on as well.
I mean, you know, when you're immersed in these 26 episode seasons, especially as a showrunner, you're never, your radar is always on for story inspiration. And in the case of the Hirogen, I happened to be invited to the sideline of an NFL football game, American football.
Yep.
And I was completely startled by how gigantic these football players were. You can't really tell because on TV, because they're all with each other. But saying sideline, I'm like, these are giant humans. They're giant. I'm like, oh, we should have aliens that are like huge like this. And that's where the Hirogen kind of started. Is I want to have, they should wear armor and they should be fucking huge. And there are certain, like one of my, I don't remember what the name of the race was, but there was an episode called Distant Origin.
Oh yes,
one of my favorite episodes.
What are they called? It's going to bug me now.
But they were dinosaur descendants.
Yeah.
You know, if you can get past that absurdity, it's a very good episode.
I liked it.
I liked Distant Origin, yeah.
But there were a lot of one-off species that were kind of fun. But Voyager's always on the move, so we never really, other than the Borg,
Voth,
yeah.
But I had to Google that. It was going to bug me otherwise.
But
now, Brannon, I have a bone to pick with you on behalf of the people and the government of Ireland. Can you please tell me who greenlit Spirit Folk and Fairhaven? You can't shake your head at this now. These episodes exist. I had to do a live stream of them last St. Patrick's Day.
I know Brian Fuller wrote one of them, so you got to bring in Brian Fuller.
Oh, I've tried.
I think that was season 6. Maybe it had to be.
I think so, yeah.
I'm trying to remember.
I apologize about the panoply of offensive Irish stereotypes on display. I think that the inspiration might have been a movie with John Wayne called The Quiet Man or something. I don't remember. I just remember thinking, oh, Brian did a good job with this draft. Thank God. I can move on to something else. Like it just, at that point, it was sometime during season 6 that I realized I was starting to get burned out.
Yeah.
And so I don't have a super clear memory of. You're saying there were 2 episodes?
Yes, there was a return as well. I might add.
Yeah, I remember. What was the first one called?
Fairhaven.
Yeah.
I remember Fairhaven. I don't remember Spirit Folk. Was that season 7?
Oh God.
But I don't know. It's that those are a little. I wish I could answer you. They're a little bit of a blur. We never set out to make a bad episode.
Oh no, it's season 6. It was season 6, episode 17.
For both of them, or which one was that one?
So Spirit Folk was episode 17. Fairhaven was episode 11 for season 6.
What? God.
So there's only 6 episodes between them.
You got to talk to Brian.
The only positive that came out of that is the only person who refused to go into the holodeck or embrace the bloody thing was B'Elanna. She was the only person who basically said that thing is going to be a bloody problem. And then watched the episode and said, yes, that's right, B'Elanna. This absolute thing is a load of shite.
Those were not good holodeck episodes.
No.
And I just think that all I can think is that we needed stories. I don't even know where that storyline originated. I think I'm not just passing it off.
Mike, Brannon is sounding like a politician here now, dodging the question and dodging the issue here. Is there? I wasn't there. Like that was the week I was on the holidays. I don't know what happened.
No, I remember everything about Sub Rosa. I mean, I remember everything about Threshold. I remember a lot about my bad episodes, but those that was a little bit of a blur at the time.
Well, the government of Ireland will thank you for the apology that you've offered, Brannon, and we'll bring Brian Fuller in now to do the next apology.
He's next in the stocks, yeah.
And Brian, Brian, good Lord, I have brain now. Brannon, question for you then. So obviously with Kate Mulgrew coming in as Captain Janeway, it was the first time we had a female lead to a series as well. Like it was obviously a big deal at the time as well. And in terms of, say, how you approached the character, how you wrote the character, did you feel a kind of a pressure on you that this wasn't just a normal captain in charge of a starship, that there was an extra, say, obligation in terms of how the character would be portrayed, how she would lead a crew in this kind of situation?
For me personally, from a writing perspective, I wasn't writing a man or a woman. I was writing a captain.
Okay.
The biggest question for me was, are they going to call her sir or ma'am? But I just had to write a good captain.
Yeah.
In terms of because to me, the key, Star Trek has always been on the forefront of diversity and depicting a future where no matter what you look like or who you are or what species you are,
yeah,
or you have a role, you have a place, you're important. It's a future where disabilities can often be abilities. That aspect of the show, which was present from day one of the original series, the key to it working, to me, is how matter of fact it was. It didn't announce itself. It didn't force itself. It's just how it was. And if you start to lean into it too much, if you start to pat yourself on the back, if you say, look at what we're doing, it's just, to me, it doesn't work. Like, nobody should be talking about the captain being a woman. I mean, there are a lot of women. Janeway came along. It's the first time we've seen her as fans, but there are tons of women captaining starships, and it's not a thing. And that's why it works to me. That's why Star Trek does it right. And that's why Star Trek, you can't call, here in America, there's this whole woke people who are woke and people who hate wokeness and all this ridiculous arguing. And Star Trek, I guess you could say, was woke, but it wasn't really, because it was just baked into the premise, and you just have to present it as regular life, and characters aren't talking about that stuff. There's a lot of, we got some heat about not showing more gay characters, and I remember Gene said one time behind closed doors, he's like, well, everyone's gay. He said, everyone's bisexual. In fact, some people are having sex with aliens. What's that? It's like there are dudes walking around in skirts in season 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And I don't, and that's not because they're Scottish. It's because Gene thought that men should be able to dress however the fuck they want. Like it's the magic of it is just the mundaneness of it. Yeah. So Jerry Taylor had a lot to do with manicuring Janeway and making sure if we were addressing any aspects of her femininity, that was Jerry's job. Janeway was her creation.
Yeah.
I just had to write, to me, it's like what makes her unique as a captain isn't gender based, except in one crucial regard, in that she was a mother of a crew. She had maternal instincts. It would have been paternal if it had been a man. But I always thought, like, well, this is her crew is her family, and she's got to get them home. And that was a strong emotional component for Janeway. Now, as just a captain, I thought, okay, well, she should be a little bit reckless. She should be a risk taker, like even more than Kirk, like, because she will do anything to get her crew home. Yeah, even make a deal with the Borg, which of course ends up being a disaster. And then that's where you mentioned the two-parter Equinox came about, which I think is a really good two-parter. I don't think it's thought of as up there, but I really liked it because it was a what if. To what extent would Janeway go? And what's great about that two-parter is, and the reason I called it Equinox is because the two, Captain Ransom and Janeway, begin to reverse roles.
Yeah.
And Janeway tortures a guy.
Yeah.
And it's really kind of fascinating. But when Captain Sisko came out, yeah, there was it just seemed like the natural thing to do, but we weren't trying to be politically correct or make any kind of, staggering statement. It's just like, how do we mix it up? And by the way, there was a moment in time when we couldn't find the right actress that they started to read men for Janeway as a backup in case. And I hated, I really didn't like that. I know Jerry Taylor didn't like it. We were rather, there were those who were rather insistent that it be a woman. But if push had come to shove, the studio wouldn't have had a problem with casting another man.
And Brannon, in terms of them, say, with 7 of 9 on the show and things like that, there's this wonderful kind of like maternal relationship between Janeway and 7. Did you plan that out originally in terms of, say, how the two of them would interact, or did that just come about like as you saw the characters interact themselves?
It was that everything about 7 of 9 was planned in advance. That's not to say it didn't evolve and inspiration occurred along the way, but my vision for 7 was that she should have a different relationship with every character.
Yeah.
And in that way, she'll reinvigorate the show. And for me, with Janeway, it was the narrative template was The Wild Child, the Francois Truffaut movie. This was a woman raised by wolves or raised by Borg, and Janeway was going to get her back in touch with her humanity and save her. And that maternal, and it was never going to work. And in my mind, she was never going to quite get there.
Yeah.
And it's a whole other thing that, my vision with the finale of Voyager was Seven of Nine sacrificing her life to save the ship. And I think the finale would have benefited from that because it needed that shock of emotion. Mm. And it was her fate. I mean, she was a tragic character. And there's a little known episode in season 7. It was like the one episode I wrote in that season called Human Error, mm-hmm. where she starts experimenting on the holodeck with romantic emotions, and she nearly kills herself because there's this fail-safe chip. Yep. The doctor finds out that she'll never be able to love because if she loves, she'll die. Yep. And to me, that's a heartbreaking tragedy for a character who knows she'll never be able to be fully human in the very best way. And she realizes that she accepts her fate, but she can do one act of love, and that is to save the crew, sacrifice herself to send the crew home. That, to me, was Seven's arc. I got outvoted in the finale, and I still stand by that decision. I know she came back in Picard and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And that's, in that regard, they were right. But I stand by, I think there wouldn't have been a dry eye in the house.
Who supported you on that one? Like, how close was the vote on it?
I was alone, man.
All right.
Nobody liked the idea except me.
Wow. Because I'm just trying to think back to that episode now. The only kind of nod to 7 of 9 in that episode is where Janeway is teaching, and one of the students asks about 7 of 9, and then she turns around and says, "I won't discuss 7 of 9."
Right.
And then that's it, because we don't see her really in the future parts of that episode. Right.
Yeah.
So is that almost like a tie back to that?
Could be. I didn't, I didn't really write that episode, but I know what you're talking about. But yes, Janeway had a very maternal relationship with her, and I love the scenes. Every scene that Janeway has with Seven's great.
Yeah,
I knew it was always electrifying. It's just great. They're just.
Well, there's a wonderful scene with them at the end of Hope and Fear at the end of the 4th season as well. Like just the very when they're playing that game on the holodeck, and it's a brilliant way to end the 4th season and kind of the beginning of the relationship between the two of them.
Yeah. Oh, there's I'll give you another example. There's a Hirogen episode called Prey where there's a species 8472 running around the ship, and Seven has no interest in saving this creature. And I don't remember. Does the creature end up dying?
Oh God,
I think it does.
Oh, I can't remember now.
Oh Christ, it's been years.
That episode.
Well, there's a final scene with Janeway.
Sorry, no, hang on. Do you know what happens? The Hirogen and Species 8472 get into a fight, and Seven beams them off the ship.
Yes, that's it.
That's what it is.
So there's a great scene in the middle of the episode where Seven's refusing to help Janeway help the creature. And then there's a final scene where Janeway comes to visit her in her cargo bay. And rhythmically, you think it's going to be some kind of reconciliation or acknowledgement. And Seven's just fucking goes at her. Says, "You're a fucking hypocrite. I don't get it. You say one thing, you do another. I stand by my decision." And that, to me, is quintessential example of how Seven really brought a lot to the show.
Yeah.
She was very, very unpredictable.
Yeah.
So kind of keeping it on that then, on that kind of note, are you glad to see characters like Seven, Janeway, the Doctor, and that still appearing in Star Trek today?
Sure. I mean, in some cases, I haven't watched enough to understand why Seven looks like a bounty hunter or something, and isn't
Fenris
speaking
Ranger.
like Seven, and it doesn't sound like the character. But in all fairness, she doesn't belong to me. She belongs to. So, but I'm thrilled for Jerry, and I'm glad they're making use of the characters. Absolutely.
And in terms of looking back on Voyager, Brandon, who was your favorite? Like I asked for Next Generation, who was your favorite character on Voyager to write for?
This may be sacrilege to say, but I found the characters more. The characters on Next Gen are the most beloved, and it's that Picard, Data, Worf triumvirate, right? It just was magical. And then, Riker's a lovable guy in his own way, and Troy and Beverly are cool characters too. But there's something about the Voyager characters I found slightly more distinctive. And maybe that's just because I was maturing as a writer. I don't know. But I loved the Doctor. I thought the Doctor was a blast, and he wasn't even supposed to be a big character. Like, he was a light bulb that you turned on and off. But of course, it being Star Trek, he ends up becoming, partly because of Bob Picardo's performance, but also just conceptually, this kind of deeply philosophical character. What rights do I have as a hologram? And he gave us all sorts of great scenes and stories, and his relationship with Seven. He was more of a, Janeway tried her best, but Seven's real mentor was the Doctor.
Yeah.
And
with the Doctor or Picardo, you could get like humor, you could get romance, you could get anger, you could get like mentorship, you could get absolutely everything. He was just absolutely incredible in the role.
Yeah, he was great. And Voyager just it was just I was able to cut loose a little more from a storytelling perspective, and just really be more cinematic and take bigger chance. Whether Voyager is under the ice and timeless, or whether it's, that ship went through every possible dramatic contortion you can imagine.
Was there a piece of that ship left that was original?
It's the classic. There's that classic philosophical. If you replace every part of a wooden ship, eventually, is it the same ship?
Yeah.
I've
had the same broom for 30 years, but it's had 18 handles and 52 heads. It's just like,
it's hard for me to discern how Voyager is regarded. There's no question that Next Gen is filled with classic episodes that people like to talk about, even to this day.
Yeah.
But, I think about certain Voyager episodes. You mentioned one called Deadlock, which is a favorite of mine.
Yeah.
Which is a really high concept episode with two ships sharing the same warp core, occupying the same place in space-time. And the way it's structured is so cool. You're with one ship, it's coming to pieces, and suddenly you're on a clean ship, and Janeway sees herself walking. It's a spine-tingling moment.
Yeah.
And it's just, and I'm not just saying that because I wrote the episode. It's brilliantly directed by David Livingston. And Janeway Kate always brought 100,000%. But is that considered a classic episode of Star Trek? I don't think so. But I'm like, well, if it had been a TNG episode, I wonder if it would have been, because I felt like it was one of those big high concept cool episodes. So, you know, it's just kind of a question, you know, did the other shows ever really get to that level that Next Gen reached? Now, of course, if you know what I'm saying, like,
Yep.
Because
I don't know.
at the same time, like, you know, the Next Generation like created its own kind of legacy, was on its own. DS9 never had its own kind of thing because it was on when Next Generation was ending, and then when it was continuing, Voyager was on at the same time. Do you think Star Trek became a victim of its own success almost? That there was no time to kind of, once Next Generation was a massive, you know, success, that everything started getting pushed out. The movies, we had three extra series and things like that. Do you think Voyager suffered because of that? Because of the fact that there was going to be comparisons to the Next Generation? There was so much Star Trek on at the time that has kind of hampered how people have viewed it all these years later.
well, I think what I've perceived is now people look at Voyager. Most people probably look at Voyager with great fondness and say, "Oh, this was actually great Star Trek." You know, this is at the time. I know very well that it was a highly regarded show, but the ratings were starting to dip. And then they shot up again when Seven of Nine came on the show. But there's no question that people were saying, well, these just are next gen episodes. And it's this thing where it's like, okay, if we make it too different, you're going to complain about that.
Yep.
And it was a victim of its own success. You know, 1,000 episodes of anything. I mean, I Love Lucy got canceled at some point. You know, the longest running show in history is Gunsmoke, an American show that ended after 25 years. I mean, all things come to an end. I think where Star Trek really started to wear out its welcome was with Enterprise. And Rick Berman fought tooth and nail to give the series a break, so that when Voyager went off the air, there would be at least a couple of years where there was no Star Trek, and the studio just wouldn't do it.
Actually, just before we jump into Enterprise, actually, Brannon, when Voyager was coming, like, was it always planned for 7 years, or was it a case that you said, no, 7 is done, or was there a hope of going to an 8th, 9th season and all that?
No, there 7 years seemed to be the run. Yep. Next Gen, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and I think Enterprise also would have gone 7 years. It did 99 episodes. That's a lot, but it would have gone 7 years had the Paramount not been, if there had not been a regime change when CBS merged with Paramount or bought Paramount or whatever the hell happened. And you had people who really didn't have an interest in Star Trek or really understand it. And it was expensive, and the ratings didn't justify the expense. So they pulled the plug early.
At what point then did you, because I know you were saying like with season 7, you weren't as involved with Voyager. When did Enterprise come about then? And like, was it?
I was working on it when they were making season 7 of Voyager. I was writing and preparing Enterprise, because that was going to have to premiere after Voyager left the air with almost no break.
Right. So literally just led straight into it.
And by the way, Brian Fuller broke into my office and stole the fucking pilot script, just like I did with Gary.
So it become a tradition.
I would only learn this years later. Brian told me this years later, and I really couldn't complain because I'd done the same thing. But Rick and I were already hard at work on the Enterprise pilot, which was, out of all the pilots, the most expensive and ambitious. Whether it looked that way, I don't know, but it certainly was true.
And what was the decision then to set it before the original series? Why go back in time and not kind of keep the continuity going forward?
So that was Rick's inspiration, and prequels really weren't a thing and it just seemed
Are we all forgetting the
novel.
Phantom Menace now at this point?
Well, we all want to forget the Phantom Menace. It's true. The Phantom Menace had come out. It just seemed like a chance to. I mean, we either were going to set a show in the same time period, which had just done nearly 1,000 episodes, or however many episodes.
Yeah.
In the further in the future. And what the hell does that mean? Are the jumpsuits tighter? Are the phasers smaller? Like, what the hell does that even mean? But
the com badges are turned sideways.
That's right. But by setting it in between Kirk and Picard, you can have characters who are. I'm sorry, it's before Kirk.
Yeah.
Yep.
You can have characters who are a little closer to us. They can wear tennis shoes, ball caps, have a dog on board, be a little more discernibly familiar. And some people don't like transporters. I know I wouldn't. There was some fun to be had and some Star Trek canon to be exploited, though that really wouldn't happen until season 4 when Manny Koto took over. I just liked the idea. And in fact, our original notion, I've said before, was to set the first season on Earth. And the building of and launching of the Enterprise was going to kind of happen, toward the end of season 1. And the studio just freaked out. They're like, no fucking way. You are not setting a Star Trek show on planet Earth. It's a space show. And we're like, fine. And then furthermore, they're like, they did not want a prequel. They said this show should take place, if anything, farther in the future. Whether they were correct or not, I don't know. But the whole temporal Cold War aspect, that was an idea I had for a completely different non-Star Trek related show.
Yeah.
Kind of a spy thriller set in different time periods. Cold War, like temporal Cold War. And I used it on Enterprise to appease the studio to say, okay, here's the futuristic component of this prequel. So you're getting a prequel with a little sequel. And they liked that, and that's why that was grafted onto the concept. But they were probably justifiably nervous about doing something that different. But we felt like if you're going to force us to put a show on this quickly, it's got to be something different.
Yeah.
We can't just, put it on The Intrepid. What's the concept? I don't know.
And what was your relationship with Rick Berman? Because I know, as you're saying, like when you're on The Next Generation years previously, he was like, that mystical kind of figure and things like that. How was your working relationship with him on Enterprise?
My working relationship with Rick was great. I had no issues with Rick. And I didn't think he had any issues with me, although if you watch the Voyager documentary, I don't know if you've seen that yet.
No.
But there were some revelations about Rick, who was sitting right behind me during the screening, that was very uncomfortable because you have to see it. It's like,
I'm one of the backers of the documentary as well, so I'll.
Oh, you need to see it, man! It turned out. I thought it turned out really good. So I got along with Rick. I didn't resent Rick, and I respected Rick. Rick really did make a promise to Gene to maintain the most important aspects of the show, which were an optimistic view of the future. I know he butted heads with the Deep Space Nine writers and Ira Bear. I can't speak to it in any detail. I wasn't part of it. But, Rick didn't like all the war stuff. He felt that Gene would have hated that. Who knows if that was true or not? Certainly, I think there are aspects of the modern Star Treks Gene probably would take issues with. I think Gene probably would have not liked Section 31, which was a Deep Space Nine invention, because it was like human beings and Earth have gotten past all of the crap. It's, if you want, we're exploring the present day human issues through metaphor, through science fiction metaphor. I mean, it's just, that's what the show is. If you want petty conflict amongst 24th century humans, you're writing for the wrong show. Just don't write for Star Trek. And I really believe that. I mean, I think the show is still popular to this day. That's one of the basic reasons, and with all due respect to the Hunger Games, a franchise about children murdering each other for food, I just don't think that's going to be talked about in 30 years with the same reverence and admiration and affection. Star Trek means so much more because of its positivity. And that's why Seth wanted to do the Orville, because it's just missing.
Yeah.
And like, Brandon, how, like, now you mentioned it, how did the Orville come about? Like, how did you kind of get to know Seth?
Well, Seth, I had hired a writer named David Goodman on Enterprise in, I think it was 2000. And he had been a writer on Family Guy. And he brought Seth into the office because Seth was a huge Star Trek fan.
Yep.
And I remember meeting Seth and telling him how much I loved Venom, because I thought he had said Todd McFarlane.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no.
He said Seth MacFarlane. I didn't know who Seth was, so I was complimenting the creature, the spider creature character. Anyway, but Seth was a Star Trek fan, a longtime Star Trek fan, and we just hit it off and became friends. And I put him on Enterprise in a walk-on role a couple times, and we remained friends for a long, long time before we ever started working together. And the first time we worked together was in 2014 on Cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
Poster back
Which
there.
I loved, by the way.
Absolutely brilliant, yeah.
Thank you. And look, he always wanted to do Star Trek. I think if Seth had been presented the opportunity to actually make Star Trek, I don't think he would have turned it down. So he just really wanted to tell those kinds of stories. And so he created the Orville. He wrote the script on spec. Fox loved it and ordered it to series. I was, I'm sure, one of the first writers that he called. And I knew what he wanted. He wanted to make both a next generation type show, but with, his own spin on it. And I just really was helping him do that. The show is kind of fascinating in that I think people thought it was going to be a satire of Star Trek, when in fact it's, if you were to sit down and watch the show, you'd see the pilot had more broad humor in it, but very quickly by episode 3, which is about this male gendered race and a little baby who's born female, is just really powerful drama with comedy frosting. And that's really what the show was at its core, was very Star Trek like. And I must say, I had not been writing anything like that for 12 years. I don't know how much time passed, but man, did I miss it. I really missed it. I at first I thought, I don't know if I remember how to write these kinds of stories. And And man, it all came back, and I'm just like, God, did I miss writing for Star Trek? You can do it, you really can do anything. It's just, I'm very grateful that I had the chance to do Orville.
And I think it's now confirmed there will be a season 4. Apparently.
Really?
I think it is. I think it is confirmed. I think as of.
Well,
I was just reading. Yeah, here we go. October 22nd of last year. Apparently,
Apparently,
Hulu
I
have
would
confirmed
believe
season
that.
4.
Yeah, I cannot confirm nor deny.
It's fine. I'll speak to Kit. I'm sure Kit will give me the lowdown.
and Brannon, looking back over your years on Star Trek, what do you think is your legacy to Star Trek with your 300 or so episodes that you were involved in?
I don't really know. I probably, if anyone remembers, I mean, one of the cool things about Star Trek, is that the writers are recognizable names right along with the actors, and
Yeah.
and I'm fine with that. I mean, and I'm also really appreciative of it, and I think it's a testament to the one of the things that Star Trek is known for is having halfway decent writing. I mean, you knew that when you tuned into a Next Generation episode, chances were you were going to see a really excellent piece of storytelling that was a cut above, like it was at least aiming for something.
Yeah.
And I'm proud to have been part of that. I think my episodes on Next Generation were kind of groundbreaking in their experimental nature and I was using quantum physics concepts, and it really wouldn't be it'd be a very long time before anyone was doing that again, especially like with Marvel, with the multiverse. Like I did a multiverse episode called Parallels that was the first of its kind that I was sure was just going to be completely baffling.
Brannon,
And there's a scene where
is that another example, Brannon, of you going to the office saying, "Lads, it's a shit idea. It's time to fire me."
well, in that case, I think I'd earned my stripes, and everyone, at least internally, was tolerating these kinds of stories. But I felt pretty confident about it. But if you watch the episode, there's a big scene where somebody has to explain what the fuck what a multiverse is. Today you're looking at it saying no shit, but back then it was like, huh? Branching realities? He's
Parallel
jumping.
universes? What?
But I'm sure that's probably how I'll be most remembered. I'm sure I'm in some people's minds a divisive figure. There was a single interview did me a lot of damage where I had mentioned that I'd never seen the original series, and I really got a lot of shit for that for a long time. Even though I wasn't touting it, it's just was the truth.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm just grateful to still be talking about this stuff.
So
and that I can even remember anything.
Well, mysteriously, your memory fades on Fairhaven and Spirit Folk, so there's that.
selective memory.
yeah.
But I got to tell you, I was a Star Trek fan. I was a fan of the movies. I didn't really watch the original series growing up, but I remember seeing the motion picture, which I fall into the camp that that's a great movie, and a really sophisticated movie, and they were trying to. It just wasn't like the original series, but in all the ways that it was different, I thought were really kind of brilliant. I remember seeing Wrath of Khan, of course. I still love nebulas because of that movie. The cat and mouse in the Mutara Nebula. I mean, how fucking great are those effects? They're still great.
Brilliant.
With the cloud tank work.
Yep.
Shakespeare should have gotten a writing credit though. All the quotes. And I have really vivid memories of seeing The Voyage Home. And what a great movie that is, and what a great piece of science fiction it is in terms of the premise of a inscrutable alien vessel coming to say hi to not humans, but an aquatic species that's gone extinct. It's just genius.
It sounds like something you'd
And
write, Brennan, in fairness now.
Well, it's just like it's just great Star Trek. It's just great Star Trek. And it kind of tapped into the save the whale conservation thing, but without hitting you over the head with it, because the fact that the aliens have come to see their old friends, the whales that humans have made extinct, it's all kind of implicit, and I don't know. I just remember loving that movie.
So just before we look to wrap up, there is one show I really need to talk about. And I was extremely gutted when it got cancelled. And I know when we spoke to Neville Page, he was also extremely gutted when it got cancelled. And it's a little show that not many people have heard of called Terra Nova.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I loved Terra Nova. It's one of those, it was the first show I bought a prop from.
What prop did you buy?
I have Shannon's badge, or one of Shannon's badges somewhere. It's in a box somewhere.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, look, that's a whole other episode of your podcast. But, Terra Nova was this when I was at Fox I was doing 24.
Yeah.
They brought me this idea. It was just like a one-pager premise, and they're like, are you interested in developing this? A writer named Kelly Marcel, who's a huge screenwriter right now, by the way. She wrote all the Venom movies, directed the last Venom movie. And I just thought, God, what a harebrained idea. So we're in a dystopian future. They've created a time portal, but it only goes to the Cretaceous era. And you're going to try to do dinosaurs on a TV budget and the future. And I'm like, no, thanks. Then they came back to me like a year later, and this time they had a script and a Bible, and I turned it down again. Then they came to me a third time and said Spielberg's attached as a producer. And I was like, I cannot, I have to take the meeting,
Yeah.
And that was a difficult show. It was a straight to series order, which I'd never done before, and learned a lot, but the hard way.
Yeah.
And it was also, when you're doing a show, particularly of that scale, you and the network and the studio, you kind of you have to all see the same show.
Yeah.
And everyone saw a different show. Spielberg was a darker vision. And I shared that's what I thought we were doing, but the network wanted like a Swiss Family Robinson show. And then there was and the studio wanted something else, and Peter Cherning's company wanted something, and the network won the day.
Yeah.
But to me, it got better as it went. But it was a really hard show to get through from a writing perspective. It was a real struggle for me.
It's a shame, because I kind of wish there was a second season to a point, because there's so many loose ends.
There should have been a second season. I think the studio network were kind of the studio, the ratings by today's standards were pretty big, but back then weren't good enough for the network to justify the expense. But for the studio, it was a huge success. They'd sold it in territories all over the world.
Yep.
But the studio network didn't get along, and the show was a casualty. Although the head of the network at the time has told me a couple of years later that he regretted canceling the show, that it should have been kept on the air, which was nice to hear. But
yeah,
too little, too late.
We had some cool stuff planned. It was just so expensive, you know.
Yeah. But Slasher was awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been, you know, it could have been better. I appreciate you saying so, but
yeah,
you know, who knows? Maybe it'll get resurrected one day.
It's quite funny because it's now on Disney Plus, and I actually watched it a few weeks ago.
It is on Disney Plus.
Yeah,
okay.
It's on Disney Plus. Yeah. So
yeah. I'm not going to watch.
It.
It'll bring back too many traumatic memories for me.
Well, in that case, then we won't talk about it anymore. Brannon, this has been a very special episode for both me and Show. So thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely. I really enjoyed myself. Thank you.
We have one final question, which we ask all of our guests. It's really easy. It doesn't need any thought behind it at all. But, Brannon Braga, what does Star Trek mean to you? So we stumped him now.
It's out after his computer froze.
Well, it's a really deeply personal question. I mean, I spent most of my adult life working on it, you know.
Yeah.
But it just, what I appreciate the most about it, I think what it means to me is excellent storytelling, and its optimistic view of humanity and the future that we could have. And I mean, even Cosmos has a very similar sensibility of, you know, look what humans are capable of, you know, and we're going to be okay. We can be okay.
Yeah.
And when I'm asked a similar question, which I've been asked many times, is why is Star Trek so popular? So why is it so popular for so long? Is basically the same question in some ways, and my answer is because it's a future you want to live in.
Yep.
And it invites you, and it's a warm blanket. I mean, you watch Nick. I think a lot of people just watch the show and they just get that feeling that Star Trek gives you.
Yep.
You know, and there are other subliminal things that, you know, I've always found interesting, like the sound of the ship, if you take that out, it all falls apart. It's like, what? Something's wrong. This is cheesy. What's happening? But you put the ship sound in.
The little beeps and hums and
even just the little low roar.
Yep. You know, there's loops of that on YouTube, like 8-hour loops of Voyager's warp core or the Enterprise's warp core.
Really?
Yeah, I have a couple of them downloaded because they're actually really good to sleep to. It's like white noise.
God. I guess that's all. Yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that. That's cool. Well, invite me back if you have more you want to talk about.
Absolutely, we would happily have you back.
If you stay on for a second, Brannon, after we do the wrap up, I'll talk to you specifically about that.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, look, thank you everyone for tuning into this week's very special episode of the Clonestar Podcast. Remember, you can catch up with more of us at our website, clonestarpod.com, the link of which is in the episode and video description below. But until next time, live long and prosper.